Some letters should never be opened. Some truths should remain buried. But when your brother dies in combat and a final letter arrives 3 weeks later, you don't have a choice. You open it. You read every word. And then you spend the rest of your life wishing you hadn't. My name's Jennifer Cole, and I'm about to tell you a story that will make you question everything you think you know about family, loyalty, and the devastating power of secrets. This is the story of my brother Marcus, a decorated Army captain who died a hero's death at 29. It's the story of a confession that arrived too late to change anything, but early enough to destroy everything. And it's the story of a decision I make every single day when I look at my grieving parents and choose to stay silent. Marcus was everything our family could have wanted in a son. 2 years older than me, he was the golden child from the moment he could walk. Captain of the high school football team, valedictorian, homecoming king, the kind of person who made everything look effortless while the rest of us struggled just to keep up. When he announced he was joining the Army at 22, my parents cried tears of pride. Our small town in East Texas doesn't produce many heroes, and Marcus was determined to be one. I was 20 when Marcus deployed for the first time. Fresh out of college, working as a teacher's aide, still living at home because I couldn't afford my own place, Marcus had always been my protector, my best friend, the person I told everything to. We talked on video calls whenever he could get internet access, and he sent letters home every few weeks. Funny stories about his fellow soldiers, complaints about the heat and the food, reassurances that he was safe, that we shouldn't worry, that he'd be home before we knew it. He came home after a year. Different somehow, quieter. There was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before, a shadow that never quite left even when he smiled. But he was still Marcus, still charming, still confident, still the center of attention at every family gathering. He stayed home for 6 months, reconnecting with old friends, spending time with our parents, taking me out for sister-brother dinners where he'd make me laugh until my sides hurt. One of those old friends was Thomas Morrison. They'd been inseparable since middle school, the kind of friendship that people write movies about. When Thomas got married to his college sweetheart, Rachel, a year before Marcus's first deployment, Marcus was his best man. I remembered the wedding clearly, Marcus giving a toast that had everyone crying and laughing in equal measure. Thomas and Rachel looking at each other like they were the only two people in the world. It was perfect, picture perfect. Marcus deployed again when I was 21, then again at 23. Each time he came home, that shadow in his eyes seemed a little darker. Each time he left, our parents aged a little more. They kept a countdown calendar on the refrigerator, marking off days until his expected return. They displayed his medals in a shadow box in the living room. They told everyone who would listen about their son, the war hero. And then, on March 15th, at 29 years old, Marcus Cole died in a mortar attack at a forward operating base in the Middle East. 3 other soldiers died with him. The notification officers came to our door at 6 in the morning. I was staying with my parents that week, coincidentally, helping my mother recover from a minor surgery. I'll never forget the sound of my father's wail when they told us. A sound I didn't know a human could make. A sound of something breaking that would never be whole again. The funeral was 11 days later. Full military honors, flag-draped coffin, 21-gun salute. Half the town showed up. The local newspaper ran a front-page story with Marcus's official portrait in his dress uniform. Thomas Morrison gave one of the eulogies, his voice breaking as he talked about his best friend, his brother in all but blood. Rachel sat beside him, holding their 6-year-old daughter, Lily, on her lap, both of them crying quietly. I watched Rachel that day. I'd always liked her, even though we weren't particularly close. She was beautiful in that effortless way that some women are, with dark hair and kind eyes. She'd always been warm to me at family gatherings, always asked about my life, always seemed genuinely interested. As I watched her comfort her daughter during the funeral, I remembered thinking how lucky Thomas was to have her, how lucky Lily was to have such loving parents. I had no idea. None of us did. The letter arrived 3 weeks and 2 days after we buried Marcus. I was back at my own apartment by then, trying to return to some semblance of normal life. Teaching second grade, grading papers, going through the motions of existence while feeling hollow inside. The mail came in the afternoon. Bills, advertisements, and one military envelope with my name written in Marcus's distinctive handwriting. My hands shook when I opened it. I sat down on my couch, suddenly unable to stand. The envelope contained 5 pages, front and back, covered in Marcus's rushed script. He always wrote like he was running out of time. The first page was normal, almost painfully normal. "Hey, Jen," it started. "If you're reading this, I'm probably gone. I'm writing this 2 days before what's supposed to be a routine supply escort, but something feels off. Call it instinct or paranoia, but I wanted to make sure certain things were said just in case." He wrote about memories. The time he taught me to ride a bike and I crashed into Mrs. Henderson's rose bushes. The time I covered for him when he snuck out to meet a girl and Dad almost caught him. The time we stayed up all night talking after our grandmother died, both of us trying to make sense of loss for the first time. "You've always been my favorite person," he wrote. "The only one who saw me as just Marcus, not as the perfect son or the war hero or any of the other bullshit roles I've had to play. I need you to know that everything I'm about to tell you, I'm telling you because you're the only person I trust with the truth." Then came the second page, and everything changed. "I did something terrible, Jen. 7 years ago, right before my first deployment. Something I've regretted every day since. Something that created consequences I've been living with in silence because I didn't know how to make it right without destroying everything." My heart started pounding. I remember feeling cold despite the warmth of the April afternoon. "I slept with Rachel, Thomas's Rachel. It was one night, one stupid, drunken mistake at my going-away party. We were both wasted. Thomas had left early because he had work the next morning. Rachel and I were the last ones there, and something just happened. We both knew immediately it was a mistake. We agreed never to speak of it, never to let it happen again. I left for Afghanistan 2 days later, thinking that would be the end of it." I had to stop reading. I had to stand up, walk to the kitchen, pour myself a glass of water with trembling hands. Marcus and Rachel, my brother and his best friend's wife. I felt sick. But I had to go back to the letter, because I had to know the rest. 3 weeks into my deployment, I got an email from Rachel. She was pregnant. The timing worked out that it could have been Thomas's, but she knew. She knew there was a chance that it might not be. She begged me not to say anything, begged me to let Thomas believe the baby was his. What could I do, Jen? I was on the other side of the world. Their marriage was solid. Thomas was so happy about becoming a father. I convinced myself that the baby probably was Thomas's anyway, that the math worked out, that Rachel was right and we should just forget that night ever happened. But then I came home and saw Lily for the first time. She was almost a year old. And Jen, she had our eyes, the eyes that you and I got from Dad, that he got from his father. Thomas has brown eyes. Rachel has brown eyes. But Lily has our eyes, and that distinctive dimple in her chin that you and I both have. I knew the moment I saw her, and Rachel knew that I knew. I had to read that paragraph 3 times before it fully sank in. Lily Morrison, the little girl I'd seen at birthday parties and holiday gatherings, the little girl Thomas doted on, posting pictures of her on social media with captions about his princess and his whole world. That little girl was my niece, Marcus's daughter. The letter continued, and each page made everything worse. Marcus explained the arrangement he and Rachel had made. He sent money every month to a separate bank account Rachel had set up, supposedly for Lily's college fund. $2,000 a month for 6 years. He'd saved an additional $100,000 in a separate account, money he'd been planning to leave to Lily somehow, though he hadn't figured out how to do it without revealing the truth. He wrote about the agony of watching Thomas raise his daughter, of buying presents that he'd give to Thomas to give to Lily, watching her open them and thank Uncle Marcus when he wanted to scream, "I'm your father." of missing birthdays and milestones because he was deployed, feeling the double guilt of abandoning both his military duties and his secret child. "Thomas is a better father than I ever could have been," Marcus wrote. "He's patient and present and devoted. He reads to her every night. He knows all her favorite things. He shows up to every school event, every dance recital, every moment that matters. I'm just the family friend who sends cards and occasional gifts. And maybe that's what I deserve. Maybe that's the price I pay for that one night of weakness." But the most devastating part came on the 4th page. "Last time I was home, Rachel called me, panicking. Lily did a science project at school about genetics, eye color, hair color, that kind of thing. She started asking questions about why her eyes were green when both her parents had brown eyes. Thomas joked about it at first, said something about maybe we should get a DNA test, find out who the real father is, and laughed. But Rachel said there was something in his voice, something that made her wonder if maybe, just maybe, he was starting to suspect. I promised Rachel I'd figure something out when I got back from this deployment. Maybe I'd confess to Thomas privately. Maybe we'd all agree to do a DNA test and deal with the results together. Maybe I'd finally be man enough to face the consequences of what I did. But I don't know, Jen. I honestly don't know what the right thing to do is anymore." The letter ended with specific instructions, the account information for his savings, a request that I find a way to make sure Lily got the money for college without revealing where it came from, and then the plea that would haunt me forever. "Please don't tell Mom and Dad. They don't need to know about this. Let them remember me as the son they're proud of, not the man who betrayed his best friend and created this mess. And please, please don't tell Thomas, unless you absolutely have to. That little girl adores him, and he adores her. Don't take that away from them unless there's no other choice. I'm begging you, Jen. Let this secret die with me." I sat on my couch for hours after reading that letter, watching the sunset through my apartment window, trying to process what my brother had told me. I felt betrayed, angry, heartbroken. How could Marcus have done this? How could he have carried this secret alone instead of confiding in me while he was still alive? How could he have put me in this impossible position? But I didn't have long to sit with those feelings, because 2 days after I received Marcus's letter, I got a phone call that made everything infinitely worse. Thomas Morrison was dead. Car accident, they said. Single vehicle. He'd driven his truck into a concrete barrier on the highway at 70 miles per hour. No skid marks, no signs he'd tried to brake or swerve. The funeral would be the following week. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. Thomas had just buried his best friend 3 weeks ago, and now he was gone too. It didn't make sense. Nothing made sense. Unless... The thought crept in slowly, horribly. What if Thomas had known? What if he'd figured it out? What if the grief of losing Marcus, combined with the suspicion about Lily, had become too much to bear? I knew I had to talk to Rachel. I had to know the truth. All of it. I went to see her 4 days after Thomas's funeral. She was staying with her parents, who were taking care of Lily, while Rachel tried to hold herself together. We sat in her childhood bedroom, surrounded by old posters and high school memories, and I showed her Marcus's letter. She read it in silence, tears streaming down her face. When she finished, she looked up at me with eyes that held more pain than I thought a person could survive. "He knew," she whispered. "Thomas knew." The story she told me then was somehow even worse than what Marcus had revealed. 3 years ago, when Lily was 3, Thomas took Lily to the pediatrician for a routine checkup. The doctor made an offhand comment about Lily's green eyes being unusual given her parents' eye colors. Nothing accusatory, just a casual observation. But it planted a seed in Thomas's mind. He'd done a DNA test, one of those home kits you can order online, swabbed Lily's cheek while she slept, sent it in with his own sample, and waited for results that he apparently suspected would break his heart. When the results came back, confirming that he was not Lily's biological father, Thomas didn't confront Rachel. He didn't rage or demand explanations. He simply absorbed it, processed it alone, and made a decision. He chose to stay. He loved Lily anyway. He chose to be her father in every way that mattered, regardless of biology. "He never told me he knew," Rachel said, her voice breaking. "Not once in 3 years. He just kept being the perfect husband, the perfect father. If anything, he became even more devoted to Lily after that, like he was proving to himself that DNA didn't matter, that love was a choice, and he chose us." "Then why?" I asked. The question we were both thinking, the question that hung in the air like poison. "Marcus's death destroyed him," Rachel said. "They were so close, you know? Thomas talked to Marcus more than he talked to anyone else. When we got the news that Marcus was gone, Thomas just broke. He stopped eating properly, stopped sleeping, stopped engaging with life. And I think he felt so alone because he couldn't grieve openly for the man who was not just his best friend, but also his daughter's biological father. He couldn't tell anyone that he'd known, that he'd forgiven it, that he'd chosen to live with that knowledge for 3 years. So he carried that grief and that secret alone until he couldn't carry it anymore. The coroner had ruled it an accident, but Rachel knew. I knew. Thomas had given up. The weight of everything, losing Marcus, raising another man's child, keeping secrets to protect the people he loved, had crushed him. And now Rachel was alone with a 6-year-old daughter who had just lost the only father she'd ever known. A daughter who had no idea that her entire life was built on a foundation of secrets and lies. "What are you going to tell Lily?" I asked. "Nothing," Rachel said firmly. "She's 6 years old. She just lost her daddy. She doesn't need to know that he wasn't her biological father. She doesn't need to know about that one night 7 years ago. She doesn't need to carry the weight of any of this. As far as she's concerned, Thomas Morrison was and always will be her father." "But my parents," I said quietly, "they don't know they have a granddaughter, Marcus's daughter. Don't they have a right to know?" Rachel's eyes hardened. A right to know what? That Marcus made a mistake? That he and I betrayed Thomas? That the little girl they've met at neighborhood gatherings is actually their granddaughter? And what happens when they want a relationship with Lily? When they want to tell her about Marcus, about her real father? She just lost Thomas. She's traumatized. The last thing she needs is more upheaval, more revelations, more adults making her life about their feelings instead of her well-being. She grabbed my hand, gripping it so tightly it hurt. "You read Marcus's letter. You know what he wanted. He begged you to keep this secret. And I'm begging you too, Jennifer. Please, please don't tell your parents. Please don't turn my daughter's life into even more of a tragedy than it already is. She's 6 years old. She deserves to grow up with some stability, some normalcy. Please." I left Rachel's parents' house that day with the weight of impossible knowledge pressing down on my chest. I had Marcus's letter. I had Rachel's testimony. I had the truth about Thomas's death. And I had to decide what to do with all of it. The money Marcus left was easy enough to handle. I set up an anonymous trust fund for Lily's education, funneling his savings through enough legal channels that Rachel could access it without questions. At least that part of Marcus's wishes I could honor. But the rest, the truth about Lily, that was different. I watched my parents grieve for Marcus, watched them age 10 years in 10 weeks, watched my father sit in his chair, staring at Marcus's medals for hours, silent tears running down his face. Watched my mother reorganize Marcus's childhood bedroom 3 times, unable to let go, needing to keep him alive somehow. And I thought about Lily, about a little girl I'd known peripherally for years, not realizing she was my niece, my brother's daughter, my parents' granddaughter. I thought about how my mother had always wanted a granddaughter, how she'd talk about hoping I'd have a girl someday so she could do all the grandmother things she dreamed about, how she'd light up around children at church, commenting on how much she missed having little ones around. Lily could give them that. Lily could be a piece of Marcus that lived on, a reason to keep going, a joy in the midst of their grief. But at what cost? I started observing Lily from a distance. I'd see her at the grocery store with Rachel, chattering away, seemingly resilient despite the trauma she'd experienced. I'd see her at the park, playing with other children, laughing. She looked so much like Marcus, it hurt. The same eyes, the same smile, the same way of tilting her head when she was thinking hard about something. I wanted to approach her, to introduce myself as more than just a family friend, to tell her about her real father, about his bravery and his kindness and all the ways he'd loved her from a distance, to give my parents the granddaughter they didn't know they had. But every time I considered it, I heard Rachel's voice. She's 6 years old. She just lost her daddy. And I heard Marcus's voice from that letter. Don't take that away from them unless there's no other choice. The ethical debate raged in my head constantly. What did I owe my parents? What did I owe Marcus's memory? What did I owe Lily? What did I owe to the truth itself? I confided in exactly one person, my closest friend Sarah, a therapist who I trusted to keep confidence and give me perspective. She listened to the whole story without judgment, and when she finished, she asked me one question. Whose needs are you prioritizing? Because you can't prioritize everyone. Someone's needs will come last. So decide, is it your parents who want to know? Is it Lily who needs stability? Is it Rachel who needs privacy? Is it Marcus who wanted secrecy? Is it yourself who needs to unburden this weight? You have to choose. That's when I realized there was no right answer. There was no choice that wouldn't hurt someone, no option that would make everyone whole. This wasn't a puzzle with a solution. This was a wound that would fester no matter what I did. I chose Lily. I chose the 6-year-old girl who had already lost so much. I chose to protect her childhood, her stability, her memory of the man she called Daddy. I chose to honor Marcus's request, even though it meant carrying a weight that grows heavier every single day. But that choice comes with its own form of torture. I visit my parents every Sunday for dinner. We eat pot roast and talk about mundane things and carefully avoid the Marcus-sized hole in every conversation. My mother shows me pictures on her phone, old photos of Marcus she's been organizing, trying to keep his memory alive. My father tells the same stories over and over about Marcus's football games, Marcus's academic achievements, Marcus, the perfect son. And I sit there, smiling and nodding, while 15 minutes away, their granddaughter is growing up without them. Last month was Lily's 7th birthday. I drove past her house and saw the party in the backyard. Balloons and decorations, and a dozen children running around. Rachel's parents were there, playing the role of grandparents, showering Lily with love and attention. Lily was laughing, wearing a princess dress, blowing out candles on a cake. I sat in my car down the street and cried, because my parents should have been there. They should have been the ones spoiling her, taking pictures, creating memories. But they weren't, and they never would be, because I made a choice. Sometimes I wonder if I made the wrong one, if honesty, no matter how painful, would have been better than this elaborate deception I'm maintaining, if my parents would have been strong enough to handle the truth, if Lily would ultimately benefit from knowing where she really came from. But then I remember Thomas. Good, loyal Thomas, who loved his best friend and his wife and his daughter enough to keep devastating secrets. Thomas, who couldn't survive the weight of all that love and all that knowledge. And I think about how telling the truth might have saved him, or it might have destroyed him faster. How there's no way to know what the right choice would have been. Rachel and I have an unspoken agreement. We're civil when we run into each other around town. We don't talk about Marcus or Thomas or that night 7 years ago. We're just two women connected by tragedy, keeping our distance, protecting the secret that binds us. But sometimes I get texts from her, late at night, pictures of Lily. She got an A on her science project. She lost her first tooth. She asked about Marcus today, wanted to know what he was like when he was her age. Little updates that Rachel knows I need, even though we've never explicitly discussed it. A small mercy in an otherwise merciless situation. I've thought about what I'll do if Lily ever finds out the truth on her own, if she does one of those ancestry DNA tests as a teenager and discovers Cole relatives she didn't know she had. If someone in town with a loose tongue and too much information decides to share what they suspect. If Rachel eventually decides that Lily deserves to know. I've rehearsed the conversation in my head 1,000 times. What I'd say to my parents, how I'd explain why I kept this from them for years, how I'd beg them to understand that I was trying to do what was best for everyone, even though best is a word that doesn't apply to situations like this. My mother would be devastated that I kept this from her. My father would be angry, betrayed, and they'd be right to feel that way. I am keeping their granddaughter from them. I am denying them a relationship that could bring them joy. I am prioritizing a promise made by a dead man over the living, breathing need of my parents to have something of Marcus that survives. But I'm also protecting a child who lost her father and doesn't need to lose her sense of identity too. A child who deserves to grow up without being burdened by adult mistakes and complicated family dynamics. A child who right now is simply being allowed to be a child. Is that worth the cost? I don't know. I genuinely don't know. What I do know is this: secrets have power. The power to protect and the power to destroy, often simultaneously. Marcus's secret destroyed Thomas, even though Thomas tried to absorb it with grace and love. Thomas's secret destroyed himself, eaten alive by knowledge he couldn't share. And my secret is slowly destroying me, though I'm determined to carry it as long as necessary. Sometimes I hate Marcus for putting me in this position, for making that one mistake 7 years ago, for writing that letter and making me responsible for his confession, for dying and leaving me to clean up the mess he couldn't face. But mostly, I just miss him. I miss my brother. I miss having someone to talk to about impossible things. I miss his laugh and his terrible jokes, and the way he could make me feel better about anything just by being there. I miss who he was before that one night changed everything. Or maybe I miss who I thought he was, and I'm mourning the loss of my ignorance as much as the loss of him. The letter sits in a locked box in my closet. I've read it dozens of times, looking for some kind of answer I haven't found yet. Some indication of what Marcus really wanted me to do. Some permission to make a different choice. But the letter just says what it says. Don't tell. And so, I don't. I carry this secret like Marcus carried it, like Thomas carried his secret knowledge, like Rachel carries her guilt. We're all just people trying to protect the ones we love, making impossible choices with incomplete information, hoping that the damage we cause in the name of mercy is somehow less than the damage the truth would inflict. But here's what I've learned. There is no painless option. No choice that leaves everyone whole. Love is messy. Families are complicated. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is bear the weight of knowledge so others don't have to.
So I visit my parents on Sundays. I hug them and tell them I love them and listen to stories about the son they lost. I drive past Lily's house sometimes and watch her play in the yard. this beautiful little girl who carries my brother's face and will never know it. I maintained a lie that protects her childhood and breaks my heart a little more each day. And I live with the question that has no answer. Did I do the right thing? Maybe someday I'll know. Maybe when Lily is older, when my parents are gone, when enough time has passed that the truth can be told without destroying what's left. Maybe then I'll find out if keeping this secret was an act of love or an act of cowardice. But for now, I carry it, this impossible knowledge, this unbearable weight, because someone has to, because Marcus asked me to, because I'm trying, in my imperfect way, to honor my brother's memory while protecting a child's future. Because some secrets, once told, can never be untold, and some truths, once known, can never be unknown. And sometimes the kindest thing we can do is carry that burden alone so others don't have to. That's what love is sometimes. Not grand gestures or perfect choices, but quiet sacrifice, bearing weight in silence, protecting people from truths that would harm them more than the lies we tell. Marcus made mistakes. Thomas made choices. Rachel made compromises. And I made a promise to keep a secret, to protect a child, to let my parents grieve the son they knew instead of discovering the granddaughter they don't. I don't know if it's right, but it's what I'm doing, day after day, year after year, living with impossible knowledge, keeping impossible secrets, loving imperfect people, and hoping that somehow, in the end, love is enough to justify the lies we tell to protect it. So I ask you, what would you do if you were in my position, carrying knowledge that could comfort or destroy? What choice would you make? Would you tell your parents about the granddaughter they don't know exists? Would you honor your brother's dying wish to keep the secret? Would you prioritize the child's stability over your parents' right to know? There's no easy answer. Maybe there's no right answer at all. But these are the questions we face when real life refuses to provide clear moral guidelines, when love and truth are in conflict, when every option causes harm. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever kept a secret to protect someone? Have you ever wished someone had told you a truth they kept hidden? How do we navigate these impossible ethical dilemmas that life sometimes throws at us? If this story made you think, if it challenged your assumptions about right and wrong, consider subscribing to this channel. We tell real stories about real moral complexity, about the messy, difficult choices people face when there are no good options. And watch the next recommended video. Another story about impossible choices and the weight of secrets awaits you there. Because life isn't simple, love isn't easy, and sometimes the hardest thing we can do is live with the consequences of our choices, knowing we might never find out if we chose correctly.